Genesis, looking for someone else. Changes in the band, summer 1970. Mid-1970s, exciting times for Genesis. Many decisions and personnel changes were made that would ultimately have a decisive impact on the entire future of the band. What you watch and hear here is told from the perspective of the protagonists. This may not always coincide with the memories of other people involved, but it is told as the individuals remember it. Sometimes a memory can shape a person's life, while the others involved may have long since forgotten the incident. Loosely based on Phil Collins from his book, Not Dead Yet. England, mid-1970, exciting times. Phil Collins would later say this when he spoke about joining Genesis. These were indeed eventful times for Genesis, which began on July 18, 1970 in Haywards Heath and came to an end in January 1971.
Trees to keep you warm.
Anthony Phillips and John Mayhew. It was a sweltering day in southern England. 5 young men had just finished their concert at the Sussex Hall in Haywards Heath, when afterwards their guitarist declared his official departure from the band. However, he had already decided to leave a few weeks earlier. An everyday occurrence in the music business, one might think. But for the then still relatively unknown band Genesis, it was a profound turning point. Anthony Phillips, the guitarist and founding member of Genesis, was plagued by stage fright and says, "For me, when the band went on the road, things began to go wrong, and I think I realized at that point that this just wasn't the life for me." The fact that we all lived together in the same cottage probably didn't help after a while. It was great fun in an idealistic way, but actually not terribly sensible for people getting on. I just found that the pressure of the whole thing got to me after a while, as we had all these gigs where agents were coming along, and I thought, I'm not sure I can deal with this. At this point, Genesis was on the verge of disbanding, which shows how important Ant was to the group. On the way back from Haywards Heath, however, Peter Gabriel and Mike Rutherford argued in favor of continuing without Anthony Phillips. Tony Banks agreed, but he wanted to find a new drummer who was more creative and had more fire than John Mayhew, their current drummer. And so it was that a short time later, the band asked John to leave Genesis. Things picked up speed when the following advertisement by Tony Stratton Smith appeared in Melody Maker on August 1st, 1970.
Tony Stratton Smith is looking for a 12-string guitarist who can also play lead, plus drummer, sensitive to acoustic music.
Phil Collins. The 19-year-old Philip David Charles Phil Collins, who according to himself, bought the latest music magazines from his newsagent every Thursday, although dated each Saturday. The music press went on sale a few days earlier, editor's note, here on July 30th, 1970, was still playing with Flaming Youth at the time. However, he was always on the lookout for new jobs, and so the framed advert caught his eye. As he felt that he was the ideal candidate and also knew Tony Stratton Smith, he went to the Marquee Club in London the next evening, Friday, July 31st, 1970, to meet him there. When asked who the band was, he replied that they were called Genesis and that Phil would have to get in touch with these guys himself. In fact, Phil rang Peter Gabriel and brought himself and his friend from Flaming Youth, Ronnie Carroll, into the conversation. And so they were invited to audition at Peter Gabriel's parents' house. At this point, our schedule differs from the one often described. We believe that the audition did not take place a week later, on 8 or August 9th, but on the weekend after Melody Maker was available, so either 1 or August 2nd. The other dates will prove this. Armando Gallo's book, I Know What I Like, contains a list of the drummers invited to the audition. The entry for Phil Collins contains his telephone number, the make of his drum kit, Gretsch, and the notations Seitī or Sun Afternoon, and plus guitarist for Ronnie Carroll, editor's note. How this audition took place is well known. However, The entry in Phil Collins' diary is less well known. There he wrote on August 4th, 1970, "Got job with Genesis." This in turn proves that the audition must have taken place on the Saturday or Sunday before August 4th. Even though Collins writes in his book, Not Dead Yet, that the audition took place a week later and that he claims to have received Peter Gabriel's call on August 8th. However, we do not consider this version to be plausible in terms of timing. As a look at the 1970 calendar and the progression of the story shows, Ronnie Carroll, however, did not get the job as guitarist, but he was to play a small role in Genesis once again. A few days later, before Genesis could resume their work, Phil Collins signed a contract with Charisma for £10 a week. Tony Banks, Peter Gabriel, and Mike Rutherford then went on a 2-week holiday. Entry into 4 of them began rehearsals on August 24th in an old building in Farnham called the Maltings. During this time, Phil stayed temporarily with Mike's parents. On October 2nd, 1970, Phil Collins played his first concert as the new drummer with Genesis. It took place at Medway Technical College in Chatham. Ronnie Carroll. However, as Genesis had not yet found a new guitarist, they initially continued as a 4-man band, with Tony Banks playing the guitar parts on a distortion unit on his Hohner electric piano. But the band was to try again with Ronnie Carroll. Ronnie told the German Genesis fan club in an interview in 1997, "Phil got the job straight away, but I didn't make it. But Genesis couldn't find the right guitarist straight away. So I got a call from them some time later." The result of the call is the fact that I traveled to them to rehearse with them for 3 or 4 days at Mike Rutherford's parents' house. I ended up playing a single concert with them. Phil Collins has said in various interviews that this concert was a Friars show, but has not mentioned the exact location. You should know that Genesis gave 2 concerts at a Friars in October 1970, on October 6th in Prince's Risborough, and on October 23rd in Bedford. To understand why there may have been some confusion here, let's take a brief look at the Friars. Dave Stopps tells us about the beginning of the Friars. On June 2nd, 1969, Robin, Terry Harms, Adrian Roach, John Fowler, Jerry Slater, and I presented the very first Friars Aylesbury gig at the new Friars Hall with a post-psychedelic band called Mandra Paddle Steamer and folk singer Mike Cooper. 200 people showed up, and we lost 35 pounds, which was a huge sum in those days. The next week we presented the Pill plus Pretty Things, and the third week free. And things started to pick up. Every Monday for the next year, we presented the best bands we could get, including Black Sabbath, Edgar Broughton, Mott the Hoople, Blauwin Pig, King Crimson, Vandergraaf Generator, and Hawk Quinn, to name but a few. We also did a few foreign gigs in Dunstable, Bedford, High Wycombe, and even one in Prince's Risborough. Back to the search for Ronnie Carroll's only concert with Genesis. In an interview with Phil Collins about the Genesis Archive 1967 to 75 box set, he finally specifies the location and names the Friars in Prince's Risborough. Is this the final proof? Apparently not. For his book Inside and Out, see review here, Robin Platts managed to interview Mick Barnard, the guitarist who played with Genesis for a short time, and a session guitarist called Kim Shaheen for the first time. Thanks to Robin Platts, Mario Giametti from Dusk was later able to speak to both of them. In February 2002, the 2 remarkable interviews were published in his Italian magazine. Letter from October 28, 1970, Peter Gabriel to Kim Shaheen. One thing in advance, Kim Shaheen never played a concert with Genesis, but a letter from Peter Gabriel to Kim reflects the urgent search for a guitarist. In it, Gabriel writes on October 28, 1970, among other things, "We have not yet had the opportunity to work on your songs, as we have been preparing the members for live performance as a 4-piece, but I hope they will simmer down once we are ready for the road again. All of us are feeling the need for a guitarist. even in the new numbers we are writing, so I hope you will let us know soon what your plans are. We are still looking for someone amongst the people over here, but as yet no one special has turned up. I think our state's tour has been put back to late in 1971, so I think you'll probably be back here before we are over in the US. All the best, Peter, Gabriel, and the others. However, the interview with Mick Barnard is even more revealing. He tells us, for example, Dave Stops, editor's note, introduced me to Genesis. The first time I saw them was at the British Legion Club in my town, Prince's Risborough. He lived there, editor's note. There was also the drummer Phil Collins, who had just joined them. They were really a great band, even though there were only 4 of them. Barnard is further quoted in Robin Platt's book Inside and Out. I went and checked out the guitarist that was sitting in prior to me joining, Ronnie Carroll, over at Cambridge Corn Exchange. Asked about this in an interview with Mario Giametti in Dusk, Mick's answer was slightly different. That's correct. The next gig they did, I went over to Cambridge to see the guitarist they had at the time. They were trying him out. I think he was from Phil Collins' band. Ronnie Carroll, that's right. That's when I suppose I realized that perhaps I could do as well. To be really truthful, honest, it wasn't really the music that I was into. But I did like them very much at the local British Legion. Very dynamic, very forceful, and excellent sound. They had no guitarist at that time. The contradictory statements by Phil Collins and Mick Barnard cannot be conclusively clarified at present. According to their itinerary, a concert was planned for October 16th in Cambridge, but we have not found an advert for the Corn Exchange on that date. However, it is mentioned in various tour date listings that the band played at the Rec Cinema as a support act for Matthew Southern Comfort. Matthew Southern Comfort were a band who, like Genesis, had also appeared on the BBC's Disco 2 program and also had a #1 hit with their single Woodstock in November 1970. We have 2 adverts for Matthew Southern Comfort at the new Rec Cinema, but unfortunately, without any mention of Genesis, which is no proof as to whether Genesis played there that day or not. However, there's no doubt that Ronnie Carroll only played 1 concert with Genesis, most probably in the short period from October 7th to October 17th, 1970. The rest of the story will explain this. Mick Barnard. Genesis were still traveling as a 4-man band and were still looking for a suitable guitarist. So it was very convenient that Dave Stops introduced them to someone. Tony Bank confirms this. We played a lot at Friars in Aylesbury, which was a great venue for us throughout this period, and we were friendly with Dave Stops, who ran it. He suggested we try Mick Barnard, who was a guitarist in a local group called The Farm. We auditioned Mick and liked his style. These rehearsals took place in mid-October 1970. Most probably, in the period from October 18th to November 1st, 1970, an otherwise concert-free period was used to prepare for the Trespass tour and to rehearse the new tracks on the album. Rehearsals were interrupted only by a single concert on the 23rd at Friars in Bedford, the day Trespass was released. On October 31st and November 1st, Genesis would take part in the 2nd Grand Benefit Festival at Sussex University in Falmer, Brighton. A poster and a flyer are available. Whether they actually played there on one of the 2 days is disputed. It is possible and understandable that the gigs did not happen in favor of further rehearsals with Mick Barnard. If this was the case, which we assume it was, the first concert with Mick Barnard as guitarist would have taken place on November 3rd at the Resurrection Club in Barnet. Unfortunately, we have not yet found any evidence in favor of either version. Mick talks about his memories of the first concert and the time he played with Genesis in Dust number 38. Not really. No, I can't. There was a very busy period. I have got some documentation and some cuttings and things, but I couldn't give you the precise gig. I know my last gig. Oh yes, I remember some of the gigs. particularly places like Heriot-Watt University during the tour of Scotland and Farks Club. I remember that quite well. And the Lyceum. I'm pretty sure I did one of the Lyceum shows. The ones that I remember the most are the ones that are on my little yellow sheet, which Tony Stratton-Smith used to give us. He would never spell Genesis correctly. He would put Genesis. And when asked about Genesis' first TV appearance on a program called Disco 2, Mick answers in the same interview in Dusk. Yes, very much so. It was quite a job. We actually had to take some equipment, which was silly as we weren't playing it. Yes, they did a nice backdrop, which from our point of view was blue, and they superimposed some war scenes on it. When that was broadcast, we were playing in Watford Town Hall, supporting Johnny Winter. And I rushed back because that was not too far from my house, and I just managed to get into my house to see us performing on Disco 2. But I've never been able to trace that copy. I'd love to have found a copy of that. I tried for months through the BBC, but apparently all copies have been deleted. Does anybody have a copy? In a search for further evidence of Barnard's time with Genesis, unfortunately, not much is available in the music press. On the one hand, there's an article by Jerry Gilbert in the music magazine Sound from December 26, 1970, which reports on the concert on December 20th in Godalming and also mentions Mick. Two other articles also discuss the change of personnel to Phil Collins and Mick Barnard. Ironically, these two articles only appeared at a time when Mick Barnard was no longer part of the band. The report of an eyewitness to the concert on December 16th, 1970 in Aylesbury is also interesting. Yes, Genesis did play a show at Aylesbury Grammar School with Mick Barnard. I know, as I was there. Admittance was for the school's pupils only, so I took a microphone with me, and without missing a beat, I waved it at the door manager, saying roadie, and walked straight in. I saw them a few weeks later at Aylesbury College with Hackett. Long after the gear was packed up, I remember the band sitting in the middle of an empty hall in Collins, saying, "I never want to hear the name Farm ever again." Talking of Farm, I saw many concerts by them. They were a wonderful band that included drummer Paul Hammond, who replaced Carl Palmer in Atomic Rooster, and bassist Nigel Harrison, who played in Silverhead, Blondie, and Checkered Past. Mick Barnard's time with Genesis came to an abrupt end on January 5th, 1971 in High Wycombe, directly after the concert where Mick's old band Farm was, piquantly, the support act. Mick recalls in Dusk as follows. I went there with Genesis and obviously I thought I was in Genesis. The support band was my old band Farm. They had a new singer and a new guitarist. We did the gig and we went down quite well. At the end of the gig, Peter called me to talk about the back of the van. It was just Peter Gabriel and me. I think the rest of them were having a drink, and that's where he explained to me that they had got another guitarist. He said they'd get my Benson Echo unit, which was faulty, repaired, and paid for. When asked if Mick ever felt part of the band, he continued in the Dusk interview. No, I don't think so. I pretty much tried to get them to say if I was in or out because I had really dropped my career to be with them. And I didn't think I was going to be in the band that long, obviously not knowing what success was to come. I don't feel cheated by anything. It was just a very nice experience at that time. I feel that they could have been a little bit more honest with the situation, but they just kept saying, "We'll let you know." At first glance, the timing of the end seemed strange, as Genesis then had to play a few more concerts as a foursome. But not for long. Steve Hackett. 4 or 5 years after leaving school, 20-year-old Stephen Richard Steve Hackett placed an advert in the music magazine Melody Maker, which initially read, "Blues guitarist, harmonica player seeks work." As he became acquainted with new, innovative music, his taste and interest in music expanded. Hackett was fascinated by the variety of possibilities. Melody Maker, December 12, 1970. In 1970, the famous advertisement in the Melody Maker of December 12th read, "Imaginative guitarist. Writer seeks involvement with receptive musicians determined to strive beyond existing stagnant musical forms. Steve Hackett says, "It was a bold statement suggesting high expectations of both myself and anyone I was to work with, but it must have had the right tone, as it attracted the attention of another like-minded idealist." And indeed, the like-minded idealist became aware of the advert. Steve writes in his book, A Genesis in My Bed, "It was one of those gray late autumn days when I was back in my bedroom practicing guitar licks, after helping Mom to take stuff out to the bin in the yard and dreaming of a rosy, distant future when the phone rang. Hello, my name is Peter Gabriel. I've just read your ad." Banks and Gabriel initiated an informal audition at Hackett's family home in the Victoria area of London, a flat far removed from the leafy climes of Surrey. Steve remembers it. "I hurtled through some pieces for Pete and Tony alone, and with my brother John on things written for guitar and flute. I could also play a bit of blues with my harmonica whilst John strummed along. One of the numbers we touched on, The Hermit, was to appear later on Voyage of the Acolyte. I played both electric and acoustic guitar, and it helped that I also played 12-string. My love of all three kinds of guitar put me in very good standing with the guys. I think they liked my eclectic approach and my interest in all styles of music. Had I realized I was competing with about 40 other guitarists, I would have been a lot more nervous." Before Steve Hackett joined Genesis, he saw them at the Lyceum on December 28, 1970, with Mick Barnard at one of his last shows with Genesis. Before I joined Genesis, I saw them at the Lyceum. I was impressed, and I was aware I had a lot to learn to keep up with them, but I was aware there were ideas I could give them. The first rehearsal with the band took place in West Hampstead. Hackett realized that he not only had to learn the songs, but also the Genesis jargon. They had their own language and shared experiences that seemed foreign to him. He says of these impressions, "They had an air of reserve too, which often left me wondering what they were thinking. They were patient with me, though, and Richard McPhail, who was always on hand to support us as a close friend, roadie, and in-house therapist, was very reassuring. He said my attitude was right because I wanted to improve. The band's music fascinated me. At this point, it was as much acoustic as electric, with elements of heavy rock and occasional bursts of frenzy." The first concert Steve played with Genesis was at London City University on January 14, 1971. Phil Collins remembers this gig as a minor disaster. Mostly, the gigs are conducted in a fairly professional manner. Get there, get on, get back. A few joints, but no body bacchanalia. The closest we get to that is at a show at London City University, which happens to be Steve's first gig with Genesis. Our stage time is later than advertised, so I pass the time by syncing a few Newcastle Browns. By the time we're on stage, I'm all over the place, literally. I do all the right fills, but do them 3 inches to the right of each drum. Forget air guitar, this is air drums. Afterwards, I'm wincing. What must this new guitarist think? First gig, and the drummer's pissed. That is the first time I'm ever drunk playing, and it will be the last. But even the new guitarist thought the performance was not that good. The London University gig was a baptism of fire. I wasn't used to doing live gigs at that stage. The material was new for me, and there was so much to get right. So I used a Rose Morris Shaftesbury duo fuzz. I couldn't stop it feeding back, which threw me, and I played so many bum notes. Then I wanted to crawl off the stage and die. I was convinced they were going to sack me, but no one complained. Revelation. The aliens had sympathy. They could see what was going on and were giving me a new chance. The next gigs went better, and Steve remembers that the gig in Bangor, Wales, where the Beatles had traveled to see the Maharishi, was a much easier experience. Very few people showed up, but now I had a Marshall Super Fuzz, which worked, and I played sufficiently well to redeem myself. I was happy to get through it, and I passed the test. The show at the Lyceum was terrifying, as it was such an important venue. My mother said I looked green, but I did okay, and the show was well attended. I was still so nervous that I forgot to walk off stage at the end, and Richard had to lead me off. "It's over now, Steve," he said with a gentle smile. Once I was backstage and normalizing, I realized I'd passed the test. This was what I'd been building up to all these years, and it was working. This marked the beginning of a new era for Genesis, and the classic phase with Tony Banks, Phil Collins, Peter Gabriel, Steve Hackett, and Michael Rutherford. Author, Peter Schutz. Editing, Alex Sturm and Helmut Janisch. Research, Peter Schutz and Alex Sturm. Special thanks go to Mario Giametti from Dusk for his help.
A flower? If you go down to Willow Farm to look for butterflies, flutterbugs, gutterflies, open your eyes. It's full of surprise. Everyone lies like the fox on the rocks. And the musical box.